Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we've got some more Tamiya 1850L to put together. For the previous videos we've done one parts bag per video, so this week we're up to bag F. However, there's quite a bit to do in this bag, so I'm afraid we're going to have to split it in two. This week we're going to sort the cab out, and then next week we will be onto the box on the back. Not an ideal split, as the box is going to be a shorter video, but it will split the editing time, making it a bit easier to manage. Anyway, here we are then, bag F. We've got some big metal plates that the cab attaches to, some hinges, mounts for the side rails. Suffice to say there's a good few metal bits in this section. In step 44 they have a painting guide and they want us to apply some decals. Now I'm going to skip over that as I've already painted the cab off camera. Remember, I'm building this just before an event, and I think I filmed this bit on Thursday evening with it needing to be running for the Saturday morning. So the first step of today is step 45. We'll need a single 2x6 self-tapper, two M3 flange nuts and two M3x12s. For plastic, we've got R1 and R4 that make up the air intake. There's also L4, the panel that fills a hole in the roof. That's already been fitted though, as it needed to be fitted before painting. It's just a case of dropping it in with some Plasti-Weld to stick it in place. Okay, here's the cab then, which is so big that we're going to have a slightly different camera angle. It was painted less than a day ago, so it's still missing some details like the black around the windows. The lacquer over the blue could do with a good polish as well, but it's not fully hardened yet. It's painted the same blue as I painted the Grand Hauler and the Actros, so it all matches the fleet. The inside is painted in matte black, along with a tongue at the bottom, so it doesn't stand out through the windows. At some point in the future, when we have it in bits again, we will add the rest of the detail, but it'll do for now. Right, the air intake is in two bits, so all we need to do is use the self-tapper to attach the square bit to the top of the long bit. Then we just offer it up to the back of the cab and install the two M3 screws with the flange nuts on the inside. They don't need to be super tight, especially if the paint hasn't had enough time to harden. Okay, step 46, the windscreen and latch. This time we need four M2x6s, two M3x12 self-tappers, four M2 nuts and a foam pad. For plastics, we've got H2 and H3, the latch parts, and there's H5, the locating pin. The three plastic bits were all white plastic, so I've painted them matte black. There's nothing much to it, but I did mask the hole that the latch rotates on to make sure it all still moves nice and smoothly. The last bit of the plastic is the windscreen. Now unfortunately it's tinted brown, which looks nice enough, but if you're wanting to fit an internal camera, it is a bit of a pain. The first little bit to get out the way is the foam pad. We need to cut a couple of small squares to stick either side of the locating pin. It's there so when the cab's in its normal position it doesn't rattle. The pad is just a sticky back foam, so we just cut a little bit out, peel the backing off and stick it down. The latch on the back is a bit more fiddly. You really need to pay attention to the diagram as it would be really easy to put it together wrong. It's attached with the two 3x12 self-tappers to the back of the cab, and when it's on, the bit with the lever should move up and down without any real friction. The last bit is the windscreen. Now it just offers up inside the cab and gets one of the M2 screws and nuts in each of the four holes. Now I'm thinking because it's almost flat, it's really just a simple curve, it wouldn't be too difficult to swap it for a flat sheet of Lexan with some suitable holes. And so with the four screws fitted, that's the windscreen in. Step 47, mirrors and the cab support rod. This time we'll be needing the two mirror stays, the cab support rod, two of the metal clamps for the mirrors, four 2x6 self-tappers and a single M2 nylock nut. For plastics we've got the two R10 mirror holders, two R8 clamp covers, and there's C11 and 13 the support rod mount. To make up the support, all we need to do is pop C13 into C11 and thread the rod through the small hole in the nub. It should freely slide up and down, and C11 should spin without binding. To stop it falling off, we just thread on the M2 nut. It doesn't really matter how far it goes on. Somewhere near the middle of the threaded bit is probably a safe bet though. For the mirrors, we need to offer up the plastic bits to the bent wire and fit a clamp across the back with 2 of the small self-tappers. The mirrors can go either way up and can be spun around, so don't worry about them being upside down. The important bit is not to over-tighten the screws. It would be very easy to strip the plastic. We want them to be tight enough that they grip the wire nicely, but so we can still move the mirror around. Next we will thread on the M2 nuts onto the threaded bits on the ends of the wire. Usually if you thread them onto the end of the threads, they're going to be close enough. To tidy it all up, there's a neat little cap that gets glued on the back to cover up the screw heads. We just need a couple of spots of poly cement to keep them in position. And that just leaves the mirrors themselves. These are Q4s from the chrome parts tree. Just like the covers, all they need is a couple of spots of poly cement to keep them in. All nice simple stuff. Step 48, the side windows, the bits we just put together, and a spring. We're going to need the small black spring, 2 2x6 self-tappers, 4 M2 plain nuts, and 2 M2x5s. For plastic bits, all we need is a T2 and a T3 for the side windows. Right, with the spring we need to pop one of the M2x5s through the loop at one end and screw it into the hole in the lever on the back of the cab. Now it's important that we don't do it up tight. We need the spring to be able to freely spin around and not be clamped down. The screw at the other end is a bit more tricky. We need to pop the other screw through the loop at the other end and screw it into the hole in the fixed mount. Now it would be easy, but we have to stretch the spring just a little bit for it to reach. If you're careful though, it's doable. You just need to make sure that the screw stays on the end of the driver until it's installed just a couple of turns. Okay, side windows next, and to make it a bit easier I'm going to use this little nut driver that came with the Hercules Hobbies Actros kit. You get one with most of the other Tamiya trucks too, except it would seem the 1850L. You can use some pliers instead, but the little driver does make it that much easier to get into the tight spaces. We need to offer up one of the mirror assemblies to the side of the cab and push it in. We can adjust the nuts that we fitted earlier to get it to fit nice and straight. Now it shouldn't be far off, but it's still nice to have it nice and parallel to the cab side. Next, from the inside we can install the window. We just need to slide it over the threads, being careful not to force it too much. If you wiggle it a bit, it will usually work its way on. Now all we do is install the M2 nuts, doing them up so they're just snug with everything pulled into position. You really don't want to do them up properly tight, as the clear plastic can start to crack when under pressure. Repeat on the other side, and that's the windows in. Very nice. And that just leaves the cab support. The plastic bit has 2 holes that line up with the holes in the side of the cab. All we do is line it up, install the 2 screws, and well, that's it, we're done. Now you can definitely tell this is a Tamiya body kit, as so far everything's fitted together pretty much perfectly. Step 49, the roof box. We need 2 M2 nuts, 2 M2x5s, and 4 3x8 self-tappers. For plastics, there's the roof box itself, which I've already painted to match the cab, and there's H7, the mount, which I've also painted matte black. The first job then is to fit the mount to the box. Now it fixes to the inside at the front with 2 of the self-tappers. Simple enough, but keep in mind, rather than holes, the mount has slots so we can adjust the height. That means for now we want to leave the screws not quite fully done up so the mount can still move. Fitting the box to the cab is a bit of a fiddle. We need to pop a screw up through one of the 2 holes near the middle of the cab, and while holding the screwdriver, line it up with one of the bosses on the mount. Once lined up, do the screw up a few turns, then do the other. When they're both partially installed, nip them both up. Now from the rear, we need to install the small M2 screws. I found I had to bend the bits on the roof box just a little bit to get everything to line up. Just enough that if you don't and you try and thread the screws in, you'll wonder why they're not going all the way through. When they're in, we can install the nuts from the inside and nip them up, which just leaves nipping up those screws in the front of the box. They don't need to be super tight, just enough to take up the slack. Step 50, the hinge plate. And we're going to need 2 of the pre-built hinges, 8 M3x6s, and the 2 big steel plates. For plastic, all we need is 2 L2 spacers. Now these come in white, but of course I've painted them matte black. The 2 steel plates are the same, so it doesn't matter which one we start with. So the first thing to do is attach the hinges to the outside holes on the plate. We want to fit them to the flat side and have the hinge pin upwards as I'm holding it. Now we just screw in the 4 screws. Now as usual, don't do them up tight yet, as we're going to want to settle the hinges in position so they work nice and smoothly. When we fit the hinges to the other plate, we also need to fit the spacers. Now it's a bit fiddly to do, but just take your time and it will all line up. Make sure all the screws are done up just far enough to take up the slack, then flex the hinges a couple of times. This will align them so you can now do them up nice and tight. If you don't align them, the hinges will be under a bit of extra stress, which in this case probably won't matter much because they're not going to be hinged all that often. But it's still the right thing to do to get it all to work smoothly. Okay, step 51, fitting the plate to the cab. This is one of those really quick steps, so all we need is 2 M3x6s, the plate and the cab. All we do then is offer up the plate to the back of the tongue on the cab. The side of the plate with the spacers goes towards the bottom. Then we just install the 2 screws. And that's about it really, just 2 screws. Step 52, the dashboard and the seats. No screws this time, we just need the seats, the seat mounts, the dash, column and steering wheel. As you can probably tell, I've already painted them, keeping it simple with just a couple of coats of grey primer and a couple of very light coats of lacquer. The mounts are painted black. First job then, after painting, is to glue some bits together. We're going to use some poly cement, and also note that I masked off all the bits that are going to get glue on them, so there's not a layer of paint. Both of the seats are the same, so it's just a case of sticking them down to the mounts. Next, we'll pop a drop of poly cement on the end of the steering column and slide the wheel on. And now we'll leave that lot to dry a bit while working on the decals. Now near the top of the decal sheet we've got the air vents, gauges and even a couple of blank bits. Now as usual with Tamiya they're rather nicely printed. All we need to do is cut them out and stick them on. Now you might notice that the colour in the video has shifted a bit. That's because a good few hours have passed, so the seats and steering column should be nicely stuck. Useful because we need to stick the column to the dash. It's just a case of a bit more poly cement, stick it on and leave it for a little while before moving on. Step 53, fitting the seats and the dash. We need 2 M3 flange nuts and 2 M3x12s. Okay, from the outside we need to pop one of the screws in through one of the outer holes on the tongue. Then on the thread we can slide over the dashboard. Follow that with one of the seats and hold it all together by threading on one of the nuts. But don't do it up tight just yet. Repeat on the other side, screw through the cab and dash, pop the seat on and thread on a nut. And now we can nip up the screws, and while you're at it you need to very carefully straighten up the seats. Step 54, the grille. And for screws there's just 2 2x8 self-tappers. For plastics there's the 2 end bits, N1 and N2, which have been painted to match the cab. There's the grille N7, which has been painted matte black. And there's the chrome Merc badge Q1. Right, first we're going to deal with the badge. On the back there's a centre nub and a single nub on one of the spokes. The nubs have holes to sit in on the grille, so you can't get it the wrong way up. To attach it we just need to apply some poly cement in and around the centre hole, then just drop the badge in place. There's still some paint on the grille, but the poly cement will grab fairly well all the same. It's not ideal, but it only needs to hold the badge on. The end bits just drop into slots at the ends and use a screw from the inside to attach. Pop them in, nip up the screws, and we're done. Step 55, the wheel arches. There's really not much for us to do in this one. There's some decals to apply if you wanted, but that's about it. The arches have already been painted, but with the tabs that get glue masked off, so we just need to peel off the masking tape. Step 56, attaching the arches and the grille. For screws there's 2 2.6x8 self-tappers and a single 3x10 self-tapper. To attach the grille we offer it up to the front of the cab with it upside down, and we install the 3x10 screw right in the middle. Then from the outside we install the 2 smaller screws. Now it's worth noting there's no point in doing the outside screws up tight. As long as it's snug, it will do its job without risking the paint. For the arches, unfortunately they didn't design them to attach with screws, so they're going to have to get some glue. So when I painted the inside of the cab, I masked off the bits that are going to get glued so we get the best joint possible. To stick the arches on, I'm not going to use glue as such. It's better to use something like Plasti-Weld. It really melts the plastic, literally welding the parts. We just need to transfer a few drops to the surface of the arch, then fairly quickly put it into position, holding it nice and tight for a minute or so it starts to get a grip. Repeat on the other side, then leave it for a good while to harden up, an hour or two at the very least. It's not worth rushing. If they come off, it's going to be a lot more hassle to try and fix them than just leaving them be. Step 57, attaching the cab to the chassis. All we need is a pair of 3x8 self-tappers. The cab drops down on the chassis, lining up the pin and the latch at the back. Then the metal plate at the front lines up over the front cross brace and the two screws go in. There's no spacers or anything to worry about on this truck, so it's really easy to do. Now I think we've got time for one more step this week, so let's finish up with step 58, the antenna mount and cab support. The antenna mount is really for 27 or 40 meg radios, so we can use the long sprung whip antenna. However, we're using a 2.4 GHz radio, so we really don't need it. Plus, in the last video we didn't fit the mounting screw, so we'll just skip it. We can, however, fit the cab support, which needs two 3x8 self-tappers and C10 the cab support mount. With the cab tip forward, but not too far forward, the best thing to do is pop a box under the front to support it. The end of the support goes between two round bits on the tray at the front of the chassis. Then the mount, C12, pops over the top and the two screws go in to hold it down. Now it's very possible if you do the screws up tight enough, it's going to lock the support in position. Very roughly, if you do them up all the way, then back them off a quarter of a turn, they'll be about right. And that's going to be it for this week. We've still got the front bumper and visor to sort out before the cab's done, but we very nearly got there. So as always, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a message if you got something to say. Bye guys!